Hello, welcome back. My name is Tasha Simone, and I'm going to be chatting today about this thing on my head and why I cover my head, what it means to me, when I started doing it, kind of everything in that regard. This is a very interesting turn of events in my life. I would say the Lord is doing a great work in me. Because if you go back on my channel, most of my previous videos are about my hair in some way, shape, or form, whether it was dyeing it or cutting it off or whatever. I used to be very obsessed with my hair and using it in different ways, and now I don't really do anything with it because I just cover it. And I want to kind of elaborate as to why. And I mean, ultimately, the reason I do it is to glorify God, and because the Bible tells me to, and I want to obey His word. I know there's different interpretations of this. The main passage that most people are discussing when talking about head coverings is 1 Corinthians 11, 2 through 16, where Paul talks about them, and so I'm just gonna go ahead and read that so you can hear what we're talking about. I'm reading from an ESV, and depending on the version, things are going to be translated a little differently, like wife and woman, but I think still with a plain reading of it in most translations, it ends up being pretty clear, but that's not really my purpose to convince you. There are plenty of more well-read theologians who actually have opinions on this. I'm more here to share my personal testimony with it, but I'm going to start with reading the word. So 1 Corinthians 11 says, "Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is for glory. For her hair is given to her as for a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God." Amen. So, maybe you've heard that before and just kind of brush it off and thought it's some specific cultural practice for the Corinthians at that time. That seems to be how most people kind of like first glance it is just like, oh, it was like just for that thing, like, and and people will say, oh, there's like at the time the symbol of prostitution, like the temple prostitutes had their heads uncovered, and so they were just trying to contrast that, but that's not at all what Paul is presenting here, because he gives reasons. He gives an appeal to nature, an appeal to creation order, and a lot more than just cultural context. And I think, especially given verse 16, if anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. Being read as the people being contentious are don't have that practice. I've heard that explained more clearly, but again, I'm not entirely here to break this down theologically. There's much more qualified people to do that. But I had read this passage, a few times maybe in my life, and like not thought much about it. Definitely thought it was just a cultural specific thing. Didn't see women around me covering their heads in church, and so yeah, assumed it was not applicable to me. But just because no one else is doing something doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. Did I say that right? Like, even if everyone else around you is in disobedience, that doesn't mean you should also be in disobedience if you feel called to obedience in this one thing. And that's kind of what ended up happening for me. It was in the first year of my daughter's life, where again, a lot changed in my life. If you've, I've explained that a bit before, and we were reading through the Bible, and I think I was also very active on Twitter, now X at that time, and there was a certain woman going to seminary who just kind of tweeted about her head covering journey. She had like started practicing it, and and just like put her thoughts out into the world. And I was just like, oh, I had never thought anyone would actually do that. I was familiar with like Amish and Mennonite communities, but I had never really thought about it being connected to 1 Corinthians 11 or anything like that. I just really hadn't thought about it much until I saw Leah on Twitter tweeting about it, and it made me pause, and it made me think, and it made me be like, is this something that I'm supposed to be doing that I just don't really see happening? And so I was also reading through the Word that year, and I don't know, I think it was probably coming through this passage where I decided to just kind of start experimenting with it, if that makes sense. I was like, I wonder what this would be like. Like, would this bring intentionality to my worship? Would it feel weird or wrong? Would it feel like I'm in obedience? Like, what? I wasn't really sure what to think of it, but I decided to just try it, just in case what I was reading in front of me was true and accurate and still applicable today. And so I did. And I remember the first like Sunday that I put a covering on my head and like walked into my kind of non-denom, just generic evangelical church, and I like felt really weird, and I like felt like everyone was looking at me or something, which is not at all what was happening. I don't think anyone even thought about it besides myself. I was definitely being silly about it, but I was like, wait, is this like weird because no one else is doing this? And so I had to like get over myself a lot, which was just a silly and human thing to do. But as I learned more about it, so I then started to like look more into like, okay, what is like the historical context here, and like what do other, like what have believers for most of time done, and like what do other people have to say about this? And started learning more, and I watched many hours of sermons on this topic that I found to be very interesting and very ultimately convicting, in support of, yes, I should continue to cover my head. And it does say, just while every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. And so I do take that to be a, like, when you are worshiping, like if you're praying or prophesying, like that's a pretty clear, like, yes, it should be on. So I don't think it's like a sin issue, has to be on all the time kind of thing. I think it is very much approved for corporate worship. And that's how I started with it, was just wearing it like on Sundays at services. But then I also started incorporating it into our home life. So like when we would come together and pray as a family, I would go and put a head covering on, and eventually I just started wearing it always, because partially out of convenience, because it was like also super awkward to be like, oh, we're gonna pray, oh, give me a second, let me go grab something to put on my head, like, and I didn't want to make a scene out of it kind of every time, and because that was not the point. And so I found it very easy to just keep it on all the time. And it also continued to make me overcome my kind of weird shameness about like, oh, am I weird? Do I look different? Are people gonna think I'm XYZ? Like, it, because it doesn't matter what other people think. It matters what the Lord thinks. And as I was going about things prayerfully, I just felt more and more like peace from the Lord that, yeah, this is how we were to be in obedience to me. I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, I just continued and eventually started wearing it all the time, partially out of convenience, but then also scripturally, I see like pray without ceasing and do all things as unto the Lord. And so it's like, okay, is there really any time when I don't want to be like looking to glorify God and looking to honor my head correctly and looking to have a symbol of authority and be like rightly in submission to my husband kind of thing? Like, there was just more and more where it just made more sense to wear it all the time. And again, I don't think it's necessary per se, but it has been practically helpful for me, because, and I think especially given my kind of hair testimony, I guess you could say, of, I mean, from the age of 11, 12, I started like cutting and then dyeing my own hair and went like full scene mode. I was dyeing my hair a different color every month, very much using it to attract attention to myself, being very prideful and immodest with it. I think there are ways in which my hair dyeing was a very wonderful, fun expression of creativity, but I don't think it was rightly ordered per se. It was trying to attract attention to myself rather than glorifying God. And so there was just a lot, and there was also a lot of like rebellion in it too, because it was just the era of dyeing your hair is a rebellious thing to do. Now it is like very kind of mainstream and common, not a big deal if you see someone with blue hair walking down the street. But when I was growing up, it felt like very rebellious and cool and different, and I wanted to be all those things. And yeah, eventually I realized all is vanity, and the Lord humbled me, and now I am in a different way. Well, yeah, and then my kind of hair testimony like kind of culminated in that I was doing so much dyeing and processing, bleaching, everything to my hair that my hair was pretty fried, and also mentally I was not in a good place, and for various other reasons, in kind of my like peak rebel, like I'm doing my own thing and not your thing, God moment, I shaved my hair off, partially out of necessity to have it be healthy again, but also partially out of necessity, but also partially out of rebellion to my nature and role and identity as a female. And so basically, suffice it to say, I've been at the whole spectrum of kind of the options mentioned in this passage. I have had my hair like cut short and shaved, and let's just say I think I look a lot more glorifying to God now than I did then. And he is gracious, and I'm in a weird way like glad that I've been through all of that, and just to have a more powerful testimony of, no, actually you should cover your head. Like just for me, it just makes a lot of sense as my kind of final, the final spot for my hair in the process of like sanctification, I guess you could say, is just going from being like so obsessed with it and prideful about it and just like human and worldly about it to, okay, but how can I be biblical about it? And that's really it. Like there's, I mean, a lot that can be gone into on like historical context. I know that I think one of the big reason that women don't cover their heads in America, because we still see it in Eastern cultures, and I mean, all the other Abrahamic religions across the world pretty consistently like still cover their head. Like Orthodox Jews, married women don't show their own hair. They wear wigs, so you can't tell that their hair is covered. It's kind of a weird loophole, I guess. But it's still just like, yeah, historically makes sense. It's like what is done, and I'm not being very clear with this, but yeah, looking into other cultures and histories, it just made more sense that like it was feminism in America that really trashed the whole idea of head coverings. And in like the 50s or 60s, there was a whole movement about like ditch the Easter bonnet kind of thing. That was more of a Catholic thing. I've heard that there have been burnings of head coverings in the suffragette movement. I couldn't exactly find a quick source on that, but just a lot of, and then there's even historical pictures of like even just 100 years ago, if you would go to a Baptist church like and see a picture of the members, like all the ladies have something on their head, and it was normal, and then just very quickly fell out of fashion with the feminist movement, and seeing it as a symbol of subjection and needing to overthrow the patriarchy by not covering our heads. And so now I'm kind of reclaiming it in a way too, because I have, yeah, we're reclaiming the head covering. How about that? It's what the Lord would have us do. And I also have found that there are some practical reasons behind it. Like it is protective of hair. It helps my hair to like stay clean and protected and stuff. I mean, sometimes I do more protective hairstyles under it kind of thing, but I also like just letting it hang out. It helps conceal if I haven't showered in a few days, or if my hair is wet, it helps conceal that, and just it really, I guess, neutralizes my appearance, and I feel like it helps me to just be a little more still and yeah, consistent in coming before the Lord. And it is handy to have a random cloth if needed sometimes, in full transparent. And I think one of the cool things about the 1 Corinthians passage is that it's not at all specific on what exactly constitutes a head covering. So that leaves some room for debate, but I think it was also in God's wisdom that he wrote the scriptures that way, because it does still leave cultural flexibility. Because like in our current modern era, I mean, maybe I look a little old school, but this is just a simple piece of cloth. It's not like culture specific, but there could be, yeah, it leaves flexibility for cultural differences. You can understand that concept. And yeah, I mean, it helps me keep my hair back without having any pieces of hardware, which I like. It keeps it out of my face and it's just convenient. Yeah, I personally, this is technically a cloth diaper. I have some that I just found that they're a really good size and shape, and then if I, in an emergency, like need an extra layer of cloth diaper for my child, like I can take it off and use it for that. I haven't done that for a long time, but it's just the most abundant squares of cloth that I had at the time when I started practicing it, and so it just kind of became my go-to, is just having that on, and it works and it's great. I really don't know what else I want to say on this topic. This has already gone on long enough. Again, this is, and it's something that I struggle to, like, I don't want to be pushy towards anyone else on this. I don't want to be legalistic about anything, but I do want to be in obedience to Christ, and it is something that I personally feel is very clear and straightforward in Scripture, and it's a very small action that I can be faithful in, and it's just like a constant reminder that if I am faithful in this like small action, it helps me to continue to be faithful in big actions too. Because also, not that anyone has asked me about it yet, which is kind of surprising, kind of not. We kind of live in a society that doesn't really get invasive into other people's business or asking questions about appearance, which maybe we should get back to doing that. I don't know. But yeah, no one's really asked about it, but I do also wear it in the thoughts that maybe one day someone will ask what it is, like why I always have something on my head and if it means something or whatever, and that would give me an opportunity to share the gospel, which would be great. And yeah, so those are my thoughts on head coverings, and I hope it's given you some food for thought, and I encourage you to go read 1 Corinthians 11 and talk to your husband and consider it, and most importantly, ask the Lord what he would have you do. And if you're not convicted about it, then that's fine, I guess. But I was, and I want to yeah, just share that with others and encourage you to hold to your convictions if you feel them, and to respond to them in faith, and know that you could be blessed through these small actions of your faithfulness, and that God has wisdom in all these things. Anyway, I hope that was helpful in some way, shape, or form, and I'll see you guys next time.